Welcome. We are so glad to have you join us here at the Team Agreements Virtual Summit, Reducing Common Disagreements in the Classroom. Here with us today is Fiona Stewart talking about collaborative leadership and how to build strong teaching teams. In her more than 25 years in the early childhood field, Fiona has worked as a teacher and director in early childhood programs, as a college instructor, a grad administrator, a program director, an author, trainer, and speaker. As the program director of the Child Care Alliance of Los Angeles, she develops and oversees workforce development and quality improvement programs, including the California Early Care and Education Workforce Registry. During her tenure, she has developed strategic relationships with stakeholders and funders and project partners on various system building efforts. She is the author of Building Together Collaborative Leadership in Early Childhood Systems through Red Leaf Press, and was chosen as a master leader from the Exchange Leadership Initiative in 2016. Well, I want to say thank you and welcome to Fiona Stewart. She's joining us today for our virtual summit. And Fiona, I'm so excited to have you with us today. Like I said, I finally got your book in. I've been waiting for it. It's been fantastic. And I'm going to dive right in because we only have a little bit of time, and I know you have a lot to share with us. And your book is about collaborative leadership. And so I kind of want to start there and talk about first, what is collaborative leadership to you, and how do you pair that with systems building?
Well, collaborative leadership to me means really working together with others and leading with the commitment to transform. So really thinking about how you can work with others with that commitment to change or transform the way that organizations and individuals work together toward a common goal. So, different than working just on your own. It's really about what is it that we want to work on together? How can we accomplish something better than we could have done working alone? What is a common goal that we're all trying to strive for, that putting our efforts together could lead us there in a different way, in a stronger way? But also there's a shared ownership that I think is important with the collaborative leadership process, that idea that when we work together, the efforts of that work will benefit us all in new ways that we couldn't have done had we done it just on our own. So it's really that collaborative team effort towards a shared purpose.
Right. And so when you talk about it in relation to systems building, how does that work together? I mean, how do you help people come together in such a way that you actually are looking at systems and not just collaboration in silos? Because there's a big difference between the two.
Right. So systems work is really more about taking individual or independent entities and then having them come together towards working towards a unified goal, unified whole purpose of some kind. And really looking at the infrastructure pieces behind those and the direct services along with those as well. So, and especially in a lot of nonprofit work or in the ECE field, especially when resources can be a challenge, or the work is complex and already siloed, sometimes pulling those resources together or those ideas together or even whole entities together to really work towards whatever it is that you're trying to work to change. So thinking about those goals, thinking about those shared purposes, and how can we combine our efforts, how can we even align our resources or our services or our programs in a way that will serve the public better, that will really reach children and families in ways that we have not been able to do in our siloed approach.
Right.
So thinking about it that way, it's really a way of sharing your resources, sharing your challenges, sharing your strengths and your needs, and approaching the work in a new and changed way.
Right. And so there's a couple of things, and I want to make the link between them, because with the summit, we've really been concentrating on teaching teams and helping them to work through, those common disagreements, and how do we set up our programs to allow that to happen. And so, of course, there's the macro system, right, between programs and as well as the community and larger infrastructures. But if we were to narrow in and talk about the systems within a classroom, because I
Mm-hmm.
don't think often our teaching teams think about their classrooms as
Right.
micro systems. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and within their classroom, there are even what I call microsystems within microsystems, right? So those
Mm-hmm.
routines that we set up. And so I appreciated that when you talked about that shared vision, those shared goals, and you talk about it even in your book where you talk about values and getting people to come in together around those. Can you talk about it just from that perspective as well as those microsystems in terms of our classrooms and how collaboration works in that sense within those systems?
Sure. Yeah, it's absolutely a system. I mean, really, just that classroom unit is a system unto itself, and then it's part of a system that is the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So it absolutely is applicable right there at that level. Um, so yeah, within any teaching classroom or any teaching team, there's different individuals, right, with their own strengths, their own values, their own challenges, their own goals, their own needs, their own values, all of those things, and you're trying to kind of blend those into a system to have your classroom run well and run smoothly. Because every collaborative effort is going to be unique, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's about those individuals that are there at the table and within the system that they have to operate in, right? Within their own organization and its resources and its individuals and its values and its mission and all of those things. Um, so, every type of collaboration is going to be its own type and its own mix, given what you're working with. So absolutely, thinking about your own value and what you come to as a teacher. Why are you here? What's your purpose in this work? What are you wanting to accomplish? What's important to you as you're working with children and families? What are values that you hold near and dear that drive you and your heart to this work? And then who else is in your teaching team, right? What are their values? What are their goals? And really thinking together, then what's our shared purpose?
Mm-hmm.
What's our shared goals that we have together? How are we using each other's strengths? How are we using our resources? How are we making decisions about that? A lot about this work is really about decisions and
Mm-hmm.
how we come to those. Um, and that's not always easy because it does mean sometimes making decisions about schedules or resources or how things are going to go in the day and who's going to do what. Um, so that's all sort of part of what's behind this work. Absolutely.
Right. And then you also talked about infrastructures. And I want to kind of go there for, a couple of minutes because everything you just talked about really requires some type of, especially if we want it to go well, some type of intentional infrastructure in order
Mhm.
for those conversations, even among the team members, to happen. And so when you talk about that also as part of a larger resource, there's the resource of time. Right? And
Mhm.
how do we build that into infrastructure or how do we build systems in place to allow that time for teaching teams to come together to even have those conversations? And I'm wondering if you have any insights or strategies or tips around that.
Yeah, that's a hard one. That's a hard one. I mean, part of that's relying on the infrastructure of the organization itself, right?
Right,
So,
right.
is there an environment in the organization and the resources in the organization to allow for some planning time, for example?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Do teaching teams have some time during the week or the month that they can spend together having those kinds of conversations?
mm-hmm,
Or even having time to sort of map things out visually for themselves or on paper or document some things for themselves. There's lots of different
mm-hmm,
ways to sort of arrive at some of this work. Um, and are there the relationships, really? Because collaborative work at its core is about relationships
mm-hmm,
and having the time uh, to work on that. It takes time, it takes effort, and teaching teams are definitely relationships that need to grow and to be nurtured
mm-hmm,
and to be supportive.
mm-hmm.
Um, and that takes some organizational support too, right? No one's ever going to be able to do this alone without that sort of level of support as well.
Right.
So, I think that's the key is can you build that into the structure of your classroom and the organization in some way, some time for planning. And then you can figure out sort of times, I think, through your week in terms of, like you said, your infrastructure, which includes things like your schedule and how the classroom is laid out and who does what. When you sort of get those situated in a place that they sort of start to hum along a little bit, it does free up some time, I think, in some ways, to then focus on the bigger pieces around values and shared purpose and goals.
And so you just hit on something, and so I'm going to take us sideways for a minute because
All right.
everyone always says, I don't have enough time, right? Or there's not enough time in the day. And we know time is a valuable, resource and commodity, absolutely. But what I loved about what you just said is that when we actually take the time or put things in place so that we can have these conversations, so that we can actually get our microsystems, our classrooms humming along, that it actually frees up more time to do some of that other things, whether it's deeper planning or, moving initiatives, getting to a different, level of practice. And so I thought that was interesting that you're actually talking about a way to get more of this resource by doing that planning, or again, putting those systems in place around infrastructure that's more likely to help, our teams come together and have those conversations. So I really appreciated that, because now you're talking about, to a certain extent, a level of control, because we often don't feel like we have much control over our time as it relates to a workplace. And
Yeah.
kind of, saying that when we do think about those systems, that infrastructure, it gives us it gives us the ability to actually get to take back some of that time for what we want to focus on. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, plans and routines. They help kids. We know they sometimes need that structure and that schedule. But I think sometimes it can help with adults too. The more that you do have a schedule and a routine that is kind of in place and you can rely on as a sort of a core infrastructure piece, it does free up a little bit of time, I think, and resources. It doesn't always work. That's not to say that, things don't happen, things don't come up, and, they do. But even that is sometimes more manageable when you've got the sort of core foundational pieces of your structure and your routine and your schedule down.
Right. And
Yeah.
I'm going to pick it up from there and move into, one of my favorite chapters is chapter 6 in your book, where part of it talks about conflict and the role of conflict. And you actually talk about planning for conflict,
Yep.
and which ties right into what you were just saying. So can you take us through a little bit of that in terms of especially how you talked about reframing conflict, and Janet Gonzalez and her work around the dance? Because I just thought
Right.
that was a great way of looking at it.
That's always a great place to start. I think we all shy away from conflict. We think of it as the scary thing that we want to avoid at all costs. But I think if you reframe it and sort of shift your thinking into something that's going to happen, it's part of life. It's sort of inevitable, and it's not a bad thing. It actually can be an opportunity, because it's going to raise a time when you have to sort of think through something differently than you did, or I ponder new ideas and new ways of looking at things. So if you see conflict and perceive it as more of a part of a partnership, it's part of collaboration, it's part of working with others, and it's really an opportunity to exchange ideas. So if you start with that place, then you're already in a different space around it. And then, like you said, if you start to then plan for it and expect it, well, then you're kind of ready for it, and it's less daunting, it's less scary. So I think it's possible to plan ahead, even within your teaching teams, and think about, okay, when we have a conflict or we see something differently or we have a disagreement about something, how are we going to resolve that? Let's think ahead and have a decision-making process or a decision-making plan. how will we do that so that you're prepared when those things come up? And that really is a place of empowerment, I think, around conflict as well. You see it as an opportunity, but you see it as something that you've now taken into your sort of repertoire of things that you know how to do and you've got some control over and you can handle. And then think about what would be our conflict resolution process. How will we work with that? Just like we would with the kids, right? We have a process generally that we work on to help kids use their words and work through conflict and solve their problems. So let's think about how that we're going to do that as the teaching team in this classroom or as employees in this organization. And it's always important, I think, to focus on the issues and not the people. That's another place where I think we get stuck.
Yes.
That it's really more, it's kind of like with two kids. That, it's not that he's the bad guy and he's the dummy. It's that you both want the truck. That's the issue, right? So we have to kind of reframe those things, I think, for ourselves as adults. That it's not that you're, et cetera, and I'm blah, blah, blah. It's that we have this issue that we need to figure out and resolve. So how can we do that? How can we work that through? And then I think really other important things are to go back to your values. What are our values around this work? What do we want to hold out and champion for ourselves during this work? And so that's a really great place to reset too. That it's really easy in conflict to just get stuck in the feelings and stuck in the frustration and the anger. But let's go back to why we're here. Let's go back to our values and what our shared purpose is. Because we're always going to be working together towards those greater things, right? That shared vision, that shared goal. So keeping that in mind, I think, helps work through conflict because it's not about the people, it's about the issue, and then working together to solve it so that you can reach the goals that you really have in mind.
Right.
Yeah, and that's, I think, sometimes where we can get stuck too is are those unclear? Sometimes we have to go back and reset, like, okay, are we clear on what our values are? Are we clear on what our vision is and our goals? Let's do a check-in on that.
Right.
And make sure that that's where we're all still headed together.
Okay. So somehow I've got to unpack all the things you just said in a few minutes. So here we go. Definitely a quality problem because you said so much in there. One of the first places I want to go is to talk about the word opportunity. And I love that you reframed it. And I even made a note in the book around using that word and the idea of shifting our thoughts away from conflict, like you said, as being bad or wrong. And we want to avoid it, at all costs. And reframing it to this idea of it's an opportunity for clarity. It's an opportunity to gain clarity about something. And that was one of the other places that you took us to is really it's about gaining clarity around an issue and not a person, right? And the idea that here we have data around an issue that's telling us something's not working for either someone or both people, but something's not working. So let's figure out what's not working and how can we move to a place where we can get it working or at least moving closer to working, knowing that not everything's going to be, solved overnight, or we might need, additional support for some of those things if it's, if it requires another system, right? Or a system larger than our classroom. So that in itself, I think, is huge. And I think that people will really appreciate the reframe because then you talk about it taking us out of this place of it being scary.
Right.
So when I look at it as an opportunity to actually gain more clarity, oh, okay, so it's really not that I'm a bad person. It's that actually I may be doing something that we just need to work through to come to a better place on. And so I really appreciated that. And then that then takes us into the concept of empowerment and control. Yeah. Right? Because now all of a sudden it's not, what I call the victim mentality. It's not something that's being done to us. It's now something that we have the opportunity to move through and again figure out what is the it, what
Right.
truly is the issue, and that alone can be a really rich conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. The power is key there. It's so important, I think, that you bring that up because so much about conflict, I think, is often when we don't feel like we have power.
Mhm.
Um, and that can happen to all of us for a lot of reasons, right?
Mhm.
It's not always easy to trust.
Mhm.
Um, it's not always easy to feel like we're in a place where we have a voice, or we'll be heard, or
Mhm.
our ideas matter, or we're valued. Um, and so, how do we help each other with that? How do we push through that for ourselves
Mhm.
to come from a place of power um, to sort of claim our voice, if we will?
Mhm.
And how do we set up um, decision-making processes and
Mhm.
conflict resolution processes that honor that? How do we set it up so that we'll all have a voice? And
Mhm.
there are ways to do that. Some people use like, passing a something around, an object, so that when you're holding it, it's your turn to speak. Or,
Mhm.
there's other ways to do that as well. But making sure that everybody's had a time for their voice to be heard.
Mhm.
Um, really start, even just little things like that can start to shift the power imbalances that are there.
Mhm.
So just, being mindful of those, making sure not to harbor the elephants, make sure to say the things that are out there and not keep them hidden and really give the space to focus on them and work on them.
Right. Okay, so that is such a provocative statement, harboring the elephants. So we only have a couple of minutes left, but can you expand on that? Like, what do you mean, or what can you give us an example of what that would look like? And again, some ways to move through that, or get people in a
Mm-hmm.
place where they're willing.
Yeah.
To bring the elephant onto the table, so to speak.
Right, right. I think the biggest thing for me that I found helps me anyway is to try to maintain an optimistic attitude. Solutions are out there, and I think sometimes those things that feel scary to say, like those elephants that we don't want to name or talk about, there's always solutions. There's always ways to solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
So just try to maintain an optimistic attitude and keep in mind that it could take time. Sometimes it takes time to work things through, and not everything needs to be solved immediately. I think that's the other thing where we get stuck in that kind of spinning wheel of getting angry and frustrated. Most things are fine. They can wait a day, they can even wait a week, maybe even
Mm-hmm.
more. So take the time to sort of transcend, if you will, the power
Mm-hmm.
issues, the dynamics, seeing things as, us versus them or the two opposing sides, and just take time to think through the solutions. They're out there, and find ways to solve things. And they might be solved in ways you have never thought of, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Um, and not everything needs to be solved, maybe even, or not everything needs to be solved the way you thought it had to be solved.
Right.
And giving the time and the space to let that happen and building the trust, again, focusing on the values and the trust and the relationships, and working collaboratively and your values and your shared goals gives you the space to to not have it be about people and the immediacy of solving the problem, but it gives you the space and the time to transform that, I think, to really think through the bigger, greater goals and how you can work through towards those.
Mm-hmm. And so, and we've heard this from everyone so far in the summit, how important relationship building is and
Mm-hmm.
trust is. And so, knowing that, what I love, and our last couple of minutes, is to really focus on this idea about having a conflict resolution process in place. Because, like we always say, it's not an if, it's a when. And
Mm-hmm.
so, as leaders, I don't know if we think about that enough. We tend to always get a kind of like blindsided, right? So I know as a director, a lot of times I was very reactive. And that's how team agreements kept happening because I kept feeling like, oh, here's another conflict, or this teaching team needs help, and how do I get there? It's always me, kind of chasing that wheel. And it wasn't until I was like, okay, I can't do it anymore. I can't put out the fires enough, that team agreements came up as a process. And so when we think about having a conflict resolution process in place, what does that do for us as leaders? I mean, how does that kind of take us from reactive to proactive?
It sounds a lot about your team agreement approach, about thinking ahead about what are the things we're working on, and how are we going to get there? What are the steps? What's
Mhm.
sort of our action plan? What are our goals? And taking that time. And a conflict resolution process can be sort of either part of that or adjacent to it,
Mhm.
uh, so that as you're working towards things, if something comes up that's a sticking point for us, how are we going to work through it and get
Mhm.
back to, um, or make more progress on our goals and our values. So to me, it's all sort of interwoven. It's all kind of combined in that sort of agreement that we have as a team together
Yeah.
of how we're going to get where we're trying to go.
Yeah. And
Hmm.
so I again, I think as a strategy, that's probably one that as leaders we don't really think through enough, but can
Yeah.
be such a highly leveraged process, right? So just planning and putting some type of conflict resolution process in place and having it as part of your overall communication plan or process, which you also talk about within your book, allows us to step into a space of, like you said, empowering everyone, because now you're in full transparency. It's not a secret for when something comes up, when a conflict arises. Here's what we're going to do to work through it, just like anything else. And the thought that I would like to leave everyone with is this idea that we do it with children all the time, right? We
Right.
teach them a problem solving process. And it's so interesting that we as adults don't put that in place for ourselves, even though we
Right.
see how well it works.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I don't know why that is. I guess it's maybe we think we're supposed to have learned all that, but humans are interesting, people, and we always have. There's always issues. There's always different ways of thinking about things. There's always another perspective. There's always another view. There's
mhm,
always another way that something could be done that we haven't thought of. And so,
mhm,
again, it kind of comes back to that having an open mind to conflict and seeing it as an opportunity and
mhm,
maintaining an optimistic attitude that
mhm.
doing something differently than it's been done today is a good thing
Ah,
a lot of
no,
times, right? I mean,
no. Well,
so that's the goal.
right, and we call that the definition of insanity, right? Is doing the same thing and expecting different results.
Right.
Right? So we have
Right.
conflict, we go in to try to change or move through it, and then we have staff say, well, this is the way we always done it. And then the question comes up, well, how is that serving you? Because
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
here we are, right? So I love that and would like to leave us with that thought as people going forward and again, you talk about it throughout the whole book, is this idea of being open, of truly treasuring diversity, which means
Hmm.
honoring diverse views,
Yeah.
knowing that when that happens, again, and you mentioned that the third space, when that happens, when two people come together with diverse ideas, we tend to create something new. And that's the beauty of the process. We can't get there
Hmm.
on our own. So
Yep.
thank you. Again, I really appreciate you spending this time with us. You gave us a lot of great strategies to kind of go back and think of, and you made it very simplistic for us in terms of, we can do this with children. Let's think about doing this for ourselves and some ways to support everyone through that. So I
Great.
appreciate it.
And if people are interested in more, should we tell them a little bit about where they can get some more information?
Absolutely. Would you like to share that with us? We know your
Sure.
book is out there and it's featured as part of the summit. So yeah, tell us.
Sure. So there's a book, it's available at Red Leaf Press. It's called Building Together. We'll preview of this cover there, Building Together, Collaborative Leadership in Early Childhood Systems. So it's there, and if people are
Yes,
interested in all that we've talked about today and more, that's a
they
place
they know how to
to see
find it.
that.
And as I've mentioned in our other talks, we'll be raffling off one of the books to a lucky winner. So we'll let people know who that is. So you are going to love the book. I can just tell you that from my perspective. Like I said, I've had it for a couple of days now, and it's already tabbed up and highlighted, and I'm like, ooh, 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 and there's lots of really good information in there. So once
Great.
again, thank you. I appreciate you being with us and
Oh,
sharing
thanks.
your
It was great to be
world.
here.
Thanks again.